I never thought installing solar panels would land me in a legal war with my neighborhood's most vindictive homeowner. But here I was, staring at a cease and desist letter that threatened everything I'd worked for. My name is Vincent O'Brien, and I'm an electrical engineer who spent 15 years designing power grids for commercial buildings across Arizona. When I finally saved enough to buy my dream house in Paradise Ridge, a gated community outside Scottsdale, I knew exactly what I wanted to do first. The Arizona sun beats down 300 days a year, and it seemed criminal not to harness that energy. So 6 months after moving in, I contracted a reputable company to install a state-of-the-art solar panel system on my roof. The installation took 3 days in March 2025. The panels were sleek, black, and practically invisible from street level. They blended perfectly with my dark roof tiles. I had specifically chosen a low-profile system to maintain the aesthetic appeal of the house. The panels would generate enough electricity to power my entire home, and the surplus would feed back into the grid, earning me credits with the utility company. It was a win-win situation, or so I thought. 2 weeks after the installation was complete, I received my first letter from the Paradise Ridge Homeowners Association. The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored paper with embossed lettering, as if that somehow gave it more authority. It informed me that my solar panels violated Section 7.3 of the HOA covenant, which stated that no exterior modifications that alter the visual aesthetic of the community shall be permitted without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. I had specifically checked the HOA rules before installing the panels. Arizona has a solar rights law passed back in 2009 that prohibits HOAs from banning solar panel installations. I knew my rights. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling bin. That was my first mistake. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange violation notice zip tied to my mailbox post. This one was less polite. It demanded I appear before the HOA board at their next meeting to discuss the illegal modifications to my property. The fine print at the bottom mentioned escalating fines starting at $500 per week if I failed to comply. I decided it was time to meet my accusers face to face. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with a folder containing printouts of Arizona Revised Statute 33-1816, which explicitly protected my right to install solar panels. I also brought my installation permits, inspection certificates, and a letter from my attorney confirming that my installation was completely legal. The clubhouse was one of those aggressively beige buildings that HOAs seem to love. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat like judges at a tribunal. There were maybe 20 other homeowners scattered throughout the room, most of them looking bored or annoyed at having to attend another meeting. At the center of the board table sat Sharon Morrison, the HOA president. She was exactly what you'd picture when you heard the word Karen. Mid-50s, with that distinctive haircut where it's short in the back and longer in the front, dyed an aggressive shade of blonde. She wore a pastel pink blazer over a white blouse, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of perpetual disapproval. Her reading glasses hung from a pearl chain around her neck. Sharon called the meeting to order by rapping a gavel on the table like she was presiding over the Supreme Court instead of a neighborhood committee meeting. She went through the usual tedious business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing pool maintenance schedules, and debating whether the community entrance landscaping needed new petunias or begonias. Finally, she looked directly at me. Item 7 on the agenda, the unauthorized solar panel installation at 4782 Desert View Drive. Mr. O'Brien, would you please come forward? I walked to the front of the room, my folder tucked under my arm. Every eye in the place was on me now. Mr. O'Brien, Sharon said, her voice dripping with false politeness, you've received 2 notices regarding the solar panels you installed on your roof without seeking approval from the Architectural Review Committee. What do you have to say for yourself? I have quite a bit to say, actually, I replied, opening my folder. First, I'd like to point out that Arizona state law explicitly protects homeowners' rights to install solar panels. Arizona Revised Statute 33, 1816 states that any covenant that prohibits or restricts solar panel installation is void and unenforceable. I have copies of the statute here if anyone would like to review it. I held up the papers, but Sharon waved them away dismissively. We're well aware of that statute, Mr. O'Brien. However, it doesn't give you carte blanche to install whatever you want, however you want. The law still allows HOAs to impose reasonable restrictions related to placement, manner, and architectural requirements. Your panels are visible from the street and they detract from the uniform appearance of our community. They're barely visible, I countered, and I specifically chose a low-profile design to minimize visual impact. I have photos here taken from the street that show how well they blend with the roof. Another board member, a thin man in his 60s named Gerald, leaned forward. The issue isn't just visibility, Mr. O'Brien. It's about precedent. If we allow you to install solar panels without going through the proper approval process, what's to stop every homeowner from doing whatever they want? We'd have satellite dishes, basketball hoops, and who knows what else cluttering up the neighborhood? This isn't a satellite dish or a basketball hoop, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This is a clean energy system that reduces my carbon footprint and my utility bills. It's the future of residential power, and trying to ban it is not only illegal but incredibly short-sighted. Sharon's expression hardened. Your condescending attitude isn't helping your case, Mr. O'Brien. The board has discussed this matter extensively, and we've reached a decision. You have 30 days to remove the solar panels from your roof. If you fail to comply, you'll be fined $500 per week until they're removed. Additionally, we'll place a lien on your property that will prevent you from selling until the matter is resolved. The room erupted in murmurs. A few people were nodding in agreement with Sharon, but others looked shocked by the harsh penalty. This is absurd, I said, my composure finally cracking. You can't force me to remove legal improvements from my own property. I'll fight this. That's your prerogative, Sharon replied coolly. But the decision stands. Meeting adjourned. She banged the gavel again, and just like that, it was over. I left the clubhouse furious, my hands shaking as I drove home. I'd dealt with difficult clients and unreasonable bosses throughout my career, but this was different. This felt personal, like Sharon Morrison had made it her mission to make my life miserable. The next morning, I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in property law. I explained the situation, and she listened patiently before delivering her assessment. They don't have a legal leg to stand on, Rebecca said. Arizona's solar rights law is very clear. They can't require you to remove the panels, and any fines or liens they impose would be unenforceable. However, fighting this could be expensive. HOAs have deep pockets funded by everyone's monthly dues, and they can afford to drag out legal battles. Are you prepared for that? I don't have much choice, I replied. I'm not letting them bully me into tearing down a perfectly legal, environmentally responsible improvement to my home. Okay, Rebecca said. I'll draft a response letter citing the relevant statutes and informing them that any attempts to fine or place liens will result in legal action. That might be enough to scare them off. It wasn't. Rebecca sent the letter, and Sharon responded with her own attorney's letter claiming that while the HOA couldn't ban solar panels outright, they had the right to enforce reasonable aesthetic standards. The letter argued that my failure to seek pre-approval was a procedural violation separate from the panels themselves. The fines started appearing on my monthly HOA statements, $500, then $1,000, then $1,500. I refused to pay any of them, and each month the total grew larger. By June, I supposedly owed the HOA over $6,000 in fines. Rebecca assured me these fines were legally meaningless, but they still appeared on my account, and Sharon made sure everyone in the neighborhood knew about my delinquency. She sent out a newsletter highlighting my case as an example of what happens when residents ignore HOA rules. She never mentioned the solar panels specifically, just referred to unauthorized exterior modifications in a way that made it sound like I'd painted my house hot pink or installed a giant inflatable dinosaur in my yard. The passive-aggressive warfare escalated. Sharon began finding other violations on my property. My garbage cans were supposedly visible from the street on non-collection days, even though they were in the same place they had always been. My front lawn had patches of discoloration that detracted from the neighborhood aesthetic. My mailbox post needed repainting. Each new violation came with its own fine. By July, I was receiving violation notices twice a week. It was harassment, plain and simple, but proving that in court would be difficult. Sharon was careful to cite actual HOA rules for each violation, even if those rules were never enforced against anyone else. The situation reached a breaking point on a scorching afternoon in late July. I was in my garage organizing some tools when Sharon pulled up in her white Lexus SUV. She got out of the car holding a measuring tape and her ever-present clipboard. "Mr. O'Brien," she called out, "I'm here to document another violation. Your grass height exceeds the 2.5-inch maximum specified in the covenant." I stepped out of the garage, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Sharon, my grass is fine. You're just looking for excuses now." "The rules apply to everyone equally," she said primly, kneeling down to measure the grass with her tape. She made a show of recording measurements on her clipboard. "According to my measurements, several areas are over 3 inches. That's a violation." "This is insane," I said. "You've been harassing me for months because I installed solar panels that I have every legal right to have. When are you going to accept that you can't bully me into removing them?" Sharon stood up, brushing grass clippings off her knees. "I'm simply enforcing the rules that all homeowners agreed to when they purchased property in Paradise Ridge. If you find that burdensome, perhaps this community isn't the right fit for you." Something in her smug expression made me snap. Not in an angry, yelling way, but in a cold, calculated way. An idea formed in my mind, one that had been percolating for weeks but suddenly crystallized in that moment. "You know what, Sharon? You're absolutely right. The rules should apply equally to everyone. I'll be paying much closer attention to compliance throughout the community from now on." She looked momentarily uncertain, like she sensed a trap but couldn't quite identify it. "Well, good. I'm glad you're finally taking this seriously." After she drove away, I went inside and pulled up the Paradise Ridge Community plat map on my computer. As an electrical engineer, I had access to county records and utility databases that most people never bothered to examine. I started cross-referencing property lines with utility easements and infrastructure maps. That's when I found it. Paradise Ridge was built in 2018 on land that had previously been part of a larger ranch. When the developer subdivided the property, they needed to run electrical service to the new homes. The main transformer that served the entire community, including the clubhouse, pool, and common areas, sat on a piece of land that technically belonged to my property. It was a narrow strip along my back property line, only about 15 feet wide, that had been designated as a utility easement. However, and this was the crucial part, the easement agreement had expired. The developer had negotiated a temporary 20-year easement for the transformer, which seemed like plenty of time back in 2018. But there was a clause that required renewal every 5 years, and no one had bothered to renew it. The easement had lapsed in 2023, 2 years before I bought the property. I dug deeper into the property records. The transformer itself was owned by the utility company Arizona Power and Light, but the land it sat on was mine. The utility lines running from that transformer to the HOA's common facilities crossed my property without any valid easement. I spent the next week consulting with Rebecca and with a real estate attorney who specialized in property rights and easements. They both confirmed what I'd discovered. The utility company had an easement for the transformer itself, but the HOA's electrical service crossed my property illegally. "This is extraordinary," Rebecca said during a conference call. "You essentially have the power to cut off electricity to the HOA's common facilities. But Vincent, I have to warn you, this could get very ugly very quickly. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about the months of harassment, the bogus fines, Sharon's smug face as she measured my grass. "I'm sure." "Okay," Rebecca said. "Here's what we'll do. We'll send a formal notice to the HOA informing them that they're using your property without permission and demanding they either stop or negotiate a new easement agreement. We'll give them 30 days to respond, just like they gave you." The letter went out on August 1st. I'll never forget the date because it was exactly 30 days after the HOA's deadline for me to remove my solar panels had passed. Sharon's response came within 48 hours, not 30 days. She showed up at my door at 8 in the morning, her face flushed red, waving a printed copy of Rebecca's letter. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her composure completely gone. "Are you threatening to cut off power to the community facilities?" "I'm not threatening anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that the HOA has been using my property without permission. You're always talking about rules and compliance, Sharon. Well, here's a rule. You can't run electrical lines across someone's land without a valid easement." "This is ridiculous. That transformer has been there for 7 years. And the easement expired in 2023. If you'd done your due diligence, you would have renewed it, but you didn't, and now we have a problem." Sharon's hands were shaking. "You can't just cut off power to the clubhouse and pool. There are over 300 families in this community." "I can, actually," I said, "but I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to grant a new easement. In exchange, the HOA will immediately cease all harassment regarding my solar panels, drop all fines, and issue a formal apology acknowledging that my installation is legal and compliant with state law. You'll also agree to update the HOA covenants to explicitly permit solar panel installations in accordance with Arizona law." Sharon looked like she wanted to punch me. "You're blackmailing us." "I'm negotiating," I corrected. "You have 30 days to respond. That seems fair, doesn't it? It's the same deadline you gave me." She turned and stormed off without another word. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for August 15th, 2 weeks after my letter. I didn't attend, but I heard all about it from my neighbor, Tom, who lived 3 houses down. According to Tom, Sharon had worked herself into such a state during the meeting that she had actually started crying while ranting about my extortion. The board had gone into executive session to discuss the matter with their attorney. I waited. The 30-day deadline came and went without any response from the HOA. Not a letter, not a phone call, nothing. On September 2nd, I took action. I hired a licensed electrician to disconnect the electrical lines running from the transformer on my property to the HOA's common facilities. It was completely legal since the lines were on my land without permission. The electrician, a guy named Marcus who I'd worked with on commercial projects, understood exactly what was happening. "Man, you've got guts," Marcus said as he worked. "I've heard horror stories about HOAs, but this is next level." "They brought it on themselves," I replied. The work took about 3 hours. Marcus disconnected the lines, capped everything safely, and documented the whole process with photos and timestamps. At 11:27 a.m. on September 2nd, the power to Paradise Ridge's clubhouse, pool facility, fitness center, and community office went dark. My phone started ringing within minutes. I let it go to voicemail. Sharon left 5 increasingly frantic messages. The last one threatened legal action and criminal charges for vandalism. Rebecca called that evening. "Vincent, I just got off the phone with the HOA's attorney. They're threatening to sue for damages and to get an emergency injunction forcing you to restore power." "Let them try," I said. "I haven't damaged anything. I simply disconnected electrical service that was illegally crossing my property." Their attorney is claiming this constitutes intentional interference with business operations and possibly extortion. "Rebecca, they've been fining me illegally for months and threatening to put a lien on my house. If anyone's guilty of extortion, it's them. And the HOA isn't a business, it's a homeowners association. They can't claim business damages." "True," Rebecca conceded. "But they're also saying the community's insurance won't cover the pool facility without power, and they might have to shut it down completely. Some homeowners are apparently upset about that." "Then maybe those homeowners should direct their anger at Sharon Morrison for letting the easement lapse and then refusing to negotiate in good faith." Over the next few days, Paradise Ridge descended into chaos. Without power, the clubhouse couldn't host any meetings or events. The pool facility's filtration system stopped working, and the pool had to be closed per health department regulations. The fitness center was dark and unusable. The community office, where residents normally paid their HOA dues and filed maintenance requests, was shut down. Homeowners who had nothing to do with my solar panel dispute were now directly affected, and they were furious. Some of them directed that fury at me, leaving angry notes in my mailbox or posting rants on the community Facebook page. But many others, once they learned the full story, turned their anger on Sharon and the board. It turned out I wasn't the only homeowner Sharon had harassed over the years. A woman named Jennifer, who lived near the community entrance, had been fighting with the HOA for months over a decorative fence she'd installed. Another homeowner, David, had been fined repeatedly for parking his truck in his own driveway instead of in his garage. Sharon considered trucks to be unsightly commercial vehicles, even though David's was a personal vehicle he used to haul his boat. These homeowners started speaking up at HOA meetings and on social media, sharing their own stories of Sharon's petty tyranny. A coalition began to form, residents who were tired of the board's arbitrary enforcement of rules and Sharon's personal vendettas. The media got wind of the story in mid-September. A local news station, Channel 12 out of Phoenix, sent a reporter to interview me. I was hesitant at first, but Rebecca thought it might help public opinion, so I agreed. The reporter, a young woman named Andrea Sanchez, asked me to walk her through the whole situation. I explained the solar panels, the harassment, the expired easement, and my decision to disconnect the power. "Some people are calling you a hero for standing up to HOA overreach," Andrea said. "Others say you're punishing innocent homeowners who have nothing to do with the solar panel dispute. What do you say to them?" "I say I tried to resolve this reasonably," I replied. "I followed all the laws regarding solar panel installation. When the HOA came after me illegally, I tried to negotiate. I sent formal letters through my attorney. I gave them every opportunity to do the right thing. They refused. So yes, I used the leverage I had available. Is it ideal that the community pool is closed? No. But that's on the HOA board for refusing to negotiate and for letting the easement expire in the first place." The story aired that evening and immediately went viral. By the next morning, it had been picked up by national news outlets. I started getting interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and various online media platforms. The story had everything people loved: corporate overreach, a David versus Goliath battle, renewable energy, and a satisfying dose of revenge. Sharon Morrison became the face of HOA tyranny. Photos of her from the news segment, where she'd refused to comment and tried to cover her face with her clipboard, became memes. The internet dubbed her Solar Panel Sharon, and she was mocked mercilessly on social media. The pressure on the HOA board became immense. At an emergency meeting on September 20th, a group of over 100 homeowners showed up demanding Sharon's resignation. According to Tom, who attended this meeting, it was absolute pandemonium. People were shouting, Sharon was crying again, and at one point someone suggested just voting to dissolve the entire HOA, Tom told me later. It was the most entertaining thing I've seen in years. 3 days later, Sharon Morrison resigned as HOA president. The board issued a formal statement saying they would negotiate a new easement agreement with me and review all HOA policies regarding solar panels and other green energy improvements. I met with the new board president, a reasonable guy named Frank who worked as an accountant, in early October. We hammered out an easement agreement in less than 2 hours. The HOA would get permanent access to run electrical lines across my property in exchange for dropping all fines, issuing a formal apology, and updating the covenants to comply with Arizona's solar rights law. They also agreed to pay Rebecca's legal fees, which had grown to nearly $15,000. I signed the agreement on October 8th. The next day, Marcus came back and reconnected the power to the community facilities. At precisely 9 a.m., the lights came back on at the Paradise Ridge Clubhouse for the first time in over a month. But the story wasn't quite over. In late October, I was contacted by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. A prosecutor named James Fitzgerald wanted to speak with me about Sharon Morrison. Apparently, during the chaos following her resignation, an audit of the HOA's finances had revealed some irregularities. I met with Fitzgerald at his office in downtown Phoenix. He was a serious man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested he didn't waste time on small talk. "Mr. O'Brien, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'll get straight to the point. Our office has been investigating the Paradise Ridge HOA's finances following complaints from several homeowners. We've discovered that Sharon Morrison had been embezzling funds for approximately 3 years. I sat back in my chair, genuinely shocked. "Embezzling? How much?" "Over $200,000, Fitzgerald said. She created fake vendor accounts for maintenance and landscaping services. The invoices looked legitimate, but the companies didn't exist. The checks were deposited into accounts she controlled. That's insane, I said. How did no one notice? HOA boards often don't have strong financial oversight, Fitzgerald explained. Sharon was the president, and she also controlled access to the financial records. The other board members trusted her. They'd approve expenditures without really examining the details. It wasn't until the new board president ordered a complete audit that the fraud came to light. What happens now? We're building a criminal case against her. Grand theft, fraud, and several other charges. She's looking at significant prison time if convicted. I wanted to talk to you because your dispute with her actually helped us. Once she resigned and lost control of the records, people started asking questions. Your case drew attention to her behavior and made people scrutinize what she'd been doing. Fitzgerald asked me a series of questions about my interactions with Sharon, the timeline of events, and whether I'd noticed anything else suspicious. I told him everything I could remember. Sharon Morrison was arrested on November 3, 2025. The local news showed footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs, and this time there was no clipboard to hide behind. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, without the armor of her position and authority. The HOA held another community meeting to address the embezzlement scandal. Frank, the new president, stood before a packed clubhouse and apologized to everyone. The stolen money would likely never be recovered, he explained, because Sharon had spent most of it. The HOA's insurance would cover some of the loss, but dues would have to increase slightly to make up the shortfall. Therefore, this should never have happened, Frank said. We failed in our responsibility to provide oversight and accountability. Moving forward, we're implementing new financial controls, including quarterly audits by an independent firm and requiring multiple board members to approve all expenditures over $1,000. People were angry, but most of that anger was directed at Sharon, not at the current board. There was a sense that Paradise Ridge had narrowly avoided complete disaster and that we needed to move forward together. As for me, I became something of a local celebrity. Neighbors who had avoided me during the power dispute now waved and smiled when I drove past. Several homeowners stopped by to thank me for exposing Sharon's corruption, even though that hadn't been my intention. In December, Frank knocked on my door holding a small plaque. The board wanted to give you this, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. It's a thank you for, well, everything. The plaque read, "In recognition of Vincent O'Brien's commitment to homeowner rights and renewable energy, Paradise Ridge is a better community because you stood your ground." It was cheesy, but I appreciated the gesture. I hung it in my garage next to my electrical engineering certifications. Sharon Morrison's trial began in March 2026. Rebecca and I both testified about her harassment campaign and her refusal to negotiate the easement agreement. The prosecution's theory was that Sharon had become increasingly paranoid about anyone questioning her authority because she was terrified someone would discover the embezzlement. My solar panel dispute had threatened her control, which is why she'd reacted so aggressively. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew the chances of recovering the stolen money were slim. I was in my backyard when I got the text from Rebecca telling me about the sentencing. It was a beautiful Arizona afternoon, sunny and clear. My solar panels were humming away on the roof, generating clean electricity and saving me hundreds of dollars per month on my utility bills. Several other homeowners in Paradise Ridge had installed solar panels after my dispute, taking advantage of the updated HOA covenants. The neighborhood was slowly transforming into a showcase for renewable energy, exactly the opposite of what Sharon had wanted. Tom came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back patio, looking out at the desert landscape beyond the community walls, and talked about everything that had happened over the past year. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Tom said. "If Sharon had just left you alone about the solar panels, none of this would have happened. She'd still be president, still stealing money, and no one would have been the wiser." "Pride comes before the fall," I said. She couldn't stand anyone defying her, even when she was legally in the wrong. "Well, cheers to you for not backing down," Tom said, raising his beer, "and for getting rid of the worst HOA president in history." We clinked bottles and drank as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Life in Paradise Ridge settled into a new normal over the following months. The HOA operated more transparently, with financial reports posted online for all homeowners to review. The board meetings became less contentious and more productive. People actually felt like the HOA was serving the community rather than ruling over it. I continued working as an electrical engineer, taking on consulting projects for commercial solar installations. The publicity from my HOA battle had actually been good for business. Companies liked the idea of hiring someone who'd literally fought for solar rights and won. In May 2026, exactly 1 year after the whole ordeal began, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. Over 50 people showed up, including Frank and most of the current board members. Someone brought a cake decorated with little fondant solar panels, which everyone thought was hilarious. As I stood there, flipping burgers and watching neighbors laugh and talk, I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. I'd bought this house dreaming of a peaceful place to live, and instead, I'd ended up in the fight of my life. But in the end, it had been worth it. Not just because I'd won, but because the community had emerged stronger and more united. My solar panels continued generating electricity exactly as they were designed to do. On bright days like this one, they produced more power than I could use, and the surplus flowed back into the grid, powering other homes throughout Scottsdale. It felt like a metaphor, somehow, the idea that standing up for what's right could have ripple effects beyond just your own life. Jennifer, the woman with the decorative fence, came over with her husband to thank me again. "I kept my fence up, by the way," she said, grinning. "The new board approved it retroactively. Apparently it's been fine all along, just like we said." David, the guy with the truck, was there too. "I'm parking in my driveway every single day now," he told me. "It feels like a small act of rebellion, even though it's completely allowed." As the evening wore on and people started drifting home, Frank pulled me aside. "I know this year has been rough," he said, "but I think you did something important, not just for Paradise Ridge, but for HOAs everywhere. People need to know they have rights, and that boards can't just make up rules and harass homeowners who disagree." "I didn't set out to make a statement," I said. "I just wanted to keep my solar panels." "Sometimes that's how it works," Frank replied. "You stand up for yourself, and it ends up meaning something bigger." After everyone left and I was cleaning up the backyard, I looked up at my roof where the solar panels sat, dark and silent now that the sun had set. They'd been the catalyst for everything, the reason Sharon Morrison had targeted me, and ultimately the reason her crimes had been exposed. I thought about all the letters, the meetings, the threats, and the month when half the neighborhood hated me for shutting off their pool. I thought about Sharon's face when she'd measured my grass, so certain of her power and authority. I thought about that moment in July when I'd decided to fight back using the one piece of leverage I had. Would I do it all again? Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really about solar panels or property easements or even about beating Sharon Morrison. It was about the principle that people shouldn't be bullied or harassed for doing something legal and right. It was about standing up to petty tyrants who abuse whatever small amount of power they're given. The solar panels had paid for themselves within 3 years through energy savings, exactly as projected. But their real value was something I could never have anticipated when I'd first decided to install them. They'd become a symbol of homeowner rights, of resistance against arbitrary authority, and of the importance of sustainable energy. Articles about my case appeared in law journals discussing HOA limitations under state solar rights laws. Housing advocacy groups used Paradise Ridge as an example of why HOA reform was necessary. Rebecca told me she'd received dozens of calls from homeowners facing similar situations, all inspired by what had happened here. Sharon Morrison's case, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority in HOA governance. Financial oversight procedures were strengthened in HOAs throughout Arizona and beyond. Some state legislators even proposed new laws requiring independent audits of HOA finances, directly inspired by the Paradise Ridge embezzlement. One evening in late May, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunset when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking at the house across the street that had recently gone up for sale. They walked over when they saw me. "Hi," the man said. "We're thinking about buying in this neighborhood. Is it a good place to live?" I smiled. "It is now," I said. "We had some problems with the HOA, but those got sorted out. New leadership, better policies, much more reasonable overall." "We were worried about that," the woman said. "We've heard horror stories about HOAs. What kind of problems did you have?" I gestured up at my roof. "See those solar panels? The old HOA president tried to make me remove them, even though they're completely legal. It turned into a whole thing." The man's eyes widened. "Wait, are you the guy from the news? The one who cut off the power?" "That's me," I admitted. They both started laughing. "That story was incredible," the woman said. "My whole family was rooting for you. You're like a folk hero." We talked for another 20 minutes. I told them about the current state of the HOA, the new board, and the improved atmosphere in the community. I assured them that Paradise Ridge really was a great place to live, as long as you weren't dealing with Sharon Morrison. They ended up buying the house across the street and moved in at the end of June. Within 2 weeks, they'd installed their own solar panels, and this time, the HOA approval process took less than 48 hours. By the summer of 2026, Paradise Ridge had 14 homes with solar panels, with more installations planned. The community had become something of a model for sustainable residential development, featured in a Phoenix magazine article about green housing trends. I never set out to be an environmental activist or an HOA reform advocate. I was just an electrical engineer who wanted to save money on his power bill and reduce his carbon footprint. But sometimes life pushes you into roles you never expected to fill. The legal fees and stress had been significant, but I'd gained something valuable. The knowledge that you can fight City Hall, or in this case, a homeowners association, and win. You don't have to accept bullying or illegal demands just because they come from someone with a title and a gavel. My story resonated with people because so many homeowners had faced similar situations, feeling powerless against HOAs that seemed to operate with impunity. They'd been told to just comply, to not make waves, to accept that the HOA had all the power. My case proved that wasn't true. As I write this in mid-May 2026, Sharon Morrison has served about 6 months of her 8-year sentence. I don't take any pleasure in her imprisonment, but I do think justice was served. She stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from her neighbors and used her position to harass anyone who questioned her. The consequences are appropriate. Paradise Ridge continues to thrive under its new leadership. The community feels different now, more relaxed and welcoming. People aren't constantly worried about getting violation notices for minor infractions. The HOA focuses on maintaining common areas and organizing community events rather than measuring grass height and harassing homeowners about approved paint colors. My solar panels are still up there on my roof, still generating electricity every day. They've become part of the community's identity, a visible reminder of what we went through and how we came out stronger on the other side. Sometimes I get emails from homeowners in other states facing similar situations. They ask for advice on dealing with unreasonable HOAs or fighting illegal fines. I always tell them the same thing. Know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand your ground when you're legally in the right. But I also warn them that fighting takes energy, time, and often money. You need to pick your battles carefully and make sure you're prepared for the long haul. Not every dispute is worth the stress and resources required to fight it, but when it comes to fundamental property rights or clear violations of law, sometimes you have no choice but to fight. The Paradise Ridge community will hold its annual meeting next month. I've been asked to say a few words about the past year and the changes we've made. I'm not much for public speaking, but I think I'll accept. It feels important to acknowledge what we've been through and to remind people that good governance requires active participation from homeowners, not just the board. Tom asked me the other day if I ever regretted installing the solar panels, knowing what it would lead to. I didn't even have to think about my answer. Not for a second, I told him. Those panels work exactly as advertised. They save me money, they're good for the environment, and they're a constant reminder that doing the right thing is worth fighting for. As the Arizona sun beats down on my roof day after day, those panels keep converting light into electricity, a perfect metaphor for turning adversity into something positive. Sharon Morrison tried to force me to remove them, but instead, she lost everything while my panels remain exactly where they belong. The power stays on in Paradise Ridge now, both literally and metaphorically. The community controls the HOA, not the other way around. And my solar panels continue their quiet work, generating clean energy and representing a victory for homeowner rights that extends far beyond one neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. That's the story of how an HOA ordered me to remove my solar panels, and I responded by disconnecting their power and going dark. It's a story about standing up to bullies, about the importance of knowing your rights, and about how sometimes the best defense is a good offense. But most of all, it's a story about how one person refusing to back down can spark changes that benefit an entire community. The sun is setting now as I finish writing this, and my solar panels are shutting down for the night. Tomorrow morning, they'll wake up with the dawn and start generating power again, just as they have every day since installation. They're not just metal and silicon and circuitry. They're a statement, a symbol, and a reminder that some fights are worth fighting, no matter how powerful your opponents may seem.